3 days before, an American F-15E Strike Eagle was shot down over Iranian territory, the President of the United States stood at the White House podium and told the American people this: "They have no anti-aircraft equipment. Their radar is 100% annihilated. We are unstoppable as a military force." That was April 1st, 2026. The F-15E went down on April 3rd. One crew member was rescued by American Special Forces conducting a combat rescue mission inside active Iranian territory. The second crew member is still missing. Iran is offering $60,000 in cash to any civilian who finds the missing American and delivers them alive to Iranian authorities. And the gap between what was said on April 1st and what Iranian air defense systems demonstrated 48 hours later is not a footnote in this conflict. It is the story of this conflict. It is the story of what happens when official narrative collides with battlefield reality at the precise moment the collision can no longer be managed or explained away. Welcome to the Global Brief. What follows is a precise and honest accounting of what happened on April 3rd, 2026, what it reveals about the actual operational state of this war, and why the distance between Washington's public framing of this conflict and the reality being managed privately has consequences that extend far beyond any single aircraft or any single missing crew member. The F-15E Strike Eagle that went down is believed to be from the 494th Fighter Squadron based at RAF Lakenheath in the United Kingdom. It is a fourth-generation multi-role combat aircraft capable of executing both air-to-air engagements and precision ground strikes, operating at speeds exceeding Mach 2, carrying up to 23,000 pounds of ordnance, equipped with some of the most sophisticated electronic warfare technology in the American military inventory. It was specifically engineered to penetrate adversary airspace, neutralize surface-to-air threats, and survive in contested environments. The base unit cost of the airframe alone sits around $31 million. Once avionics suites, weapon systems integration, radar packages, and the training investment required to produce a fully qualified two-man crew are added, the total loss figure approaches $50 million per aircraft. On April 3rd, that aircraft was struck and brought down by an air defense system that Washington's senior officials had publicly declared no longer functioned days before the engagement occurred. This is the first confirmed loss of a crewed American aircraft inside Iranian airspace since Operation Epic Fury began on February 28th. Not a drone, not a missile, a two-seat fighter jet with two human beings aboard, brought down by a system that the commander-in-chief had told the American public was entirely destroyed. That specific combination, the loss itself, and the categorical official denial of the capability that produced it, is what makes April 3rd categorically different from every other military incident in this war. The same day the F-15E went down, an A-10 Thunderbolt II was also struck by Iranian fire while conducting search and rescue support for the downed crew. The A-10 pilot managed to bring his damaged aircraft to Kuwaiti airspace before ejecting safely. He was recovered. The aircraft was destroyed. Two Black Hawk helicopters also took direct fire during the rescue operation. Both sustained damage. Crew members were wounded. Both helicopters managed to land without additional losses. In a single 24-hour window, the United States lost two aircraft to Iranian fire, had two additional helicopters struck, and still had one service member unaccounted for somewhere inside Iran. That is not a marginal event in an otherwise clean campaign. That is the kind of operational day that forces planners back to the drawing board and creates questions that official statements are not designed to answer honestly. Prior to April 3rd, the last time the United States lost a crewed aircraft to hostile enemy fire was during the 2003 invasion of Iraq, more than 23 years earlier. That is how long American air power had operated without this category of loss. 23 years of sorties, campaigns, and combat operations without an enemy bringing down a crewed jet. And now it has happened, not in a peripheral skirmish, but in the middle of a declared war, days after the commander-in-chief said Iran was completely decimated and its air defenses were 100% annihilated. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth had said just before this incident that he hoped everyone watching understood what uncontested airspace and complete control meant. Iran answered on April 3rd. The answer was not theoretical. It was 2 aircraft and a missing crew member. The question that nobody in Washington wants to answer clearly is the one that defines the entire conversation. If Iran's radar was 100% annihilated, what brought the F-15E down? The answer matters because it tells you more about the real operational state of this war than anything said from a White House podium. And it explains why the conditions that produced April 3rd have not been changed by 5 weeks of intensive American and Israeli airstrikes. Iran has spent decades building what military analysts describe as a layered, redundant air defense architecture. Not one system, but dozens of overlapping systems at different ranges and altitudes. At the top sit long-range fixed platforms, Russian-supplied S-300 batteries, and Iran's indigenous Bavar 373, engineered specifically to engage Western aircraft at extended range. Those large fixed installations have absorbed the heaviest damage across 5 weeks of American and Israeli strikes on radar sites, command infrastructure, and missile launch positions across Iran. Significant portions of that outer fixed layer have been meaningfully degraded. That part of the official narrative is accurate. But Iran's real strategic depth was never concentrated in those visible, targetable fixed installations. It was always in something harder to find, impossible to permanently destroy, and nearly impossible to preempt. Man-portable air defense systems, MANPADS, are shoulder-fired missiles that a single fighter can carry, conceal in a vehicle, and fire from almost any position with open sky above it. A MANPADS operator needs no networked radar, no command center, no external communication, and no fixed infrastructure of any kind to pose a lethal threat to aircraft within their engagement envelope, typically below roughly 15,000 feet. They need a missile, a launcher, a heat source descending through the sky, and an aircraft flying low enough to fall within range. The F-15E is not a stealth aircraft. Its radar cross-section is substantially larger than an F-35's, and its twin engines produce a heat signature that infrared-guided systems are specifically engineered to pursue. According to analysts cited in reporting from the days following the incident, American aircraft had been operating at progressively lower altitudes over Iran as Operation Epic Fury extended through its 5th week. The operational logic behind that shift is understandable. Lower altitude sorties can conserve expensive standoff munitions and allow more precise targeting of dispersed Iranian assets across difficult terrain. But that same calculation, fly lower to avoid the degraded long-range fixed systems, may have placed the F-15E directly into the engagement envelope of the one category of threat that weeks of airstrikes cannot eliminate. A disabled air defense system is not a destroyed air defense system. A degraded radar network above 15,000 feet does not change the threat environment below it. And American aircraft operating at low altitude were flying into that unchanged threat environment while Washington was publicly describing the threat as entirely eliminated. There is documented precedent that makes this more than retrospective speculation. On March 26th, 10 days before the F-15E was lost, a U.S. Navy F/A-18 Super Hornet, conducting a low-altitude strafing run near the port city of Chabahar, was targeted by what appeared to be an Iranian MANPADS during its run. Video circulated showing a missile detonating close to the F/A-18's tail. The jet survived. The pilot executed a hard brake turn, deployed countermeasures, and the combination saved the aircraft. But that near miss was a documented visible warning that Iran's MANPADS teams were active, positioned, and engaging American jets flying low over Iranian territory. 10 days before the F-15E was lost, the warning was available. The operational adjustment that would have addressed it was not implemented with sufficient urgency before April 3rd. Iran maintained over 20 distinct categories of anti-air missile systems as of 2023, a mix of domestic development, Russian imports, and other foreign origin technology integrated across a distributed network. 5 weeks of intensive strikes have significantly degraded the fixed outer layer. The mobile interior, dispersed launchers, truck-mounted systems, individual MANPADS operators across Iran's vast terrain remains substantially intact. That distinction is the gap that Washington's public language has consistently and consequentially failed to communicate to the American public. Air superiority means you can broadly operate and hit targets in contested airspace without being systematically prevented from doing so. Air supremacy means your aircraft face no meaningful threat at all. Zero losses, zero risk. Complete freedom of action across the entire airspace. That is the condition Trump and Hegseth publicly described. April 3rd demonstrated that description did not reflect the operational reality American pilots were actually flying into. The cost mathematics of April 3rd carry their own strategic weight. A MANPADS missile costs between $30,000 and $100,000, depending on the system. The F-15E costs approximately $50 million. The A-10 lost the same day costs around $20 million before accounting for training history and crew investment. If Iranian shoulder-fired missiles contributed to both losses on April 3rd, the raw financial exchange runs at ratios exceeding 100-to-1 in Tehran's favor. That ratio does not improve as American aircraft are pushed to progressively lower altitudes to conserve standoff weapons and maintain operational tempo against dispersed Iranian targets. It compounds with every additional sortie flown in the same threat environment without a structural change in how American aircraft are being employed. F-15Es are not produced on demand. Production lines operate on multi-year schedules. Each airframe lost represents years of manufacturing lead time. Each loss is a multi-year gap in capability that cannot be filled quickly. The diplomatic dimension of April 3rd adds a layer that most coverage is missing. Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, Speaker of Iran's parliament and one of Tehran's most senior figures, still operational after weeks of American strikes, posted publicly on the same day the F-15E went down. After defeating Iran 37 times in a row, this brilliant no-strategy war they started has now been downgraded from regime change to, "Hey, can anyone find our pilots, please?" He added, "Wow, what incredible progress. Absolute geniuses." That post went out while American search crews were still inside Iran. Ghalibaf is not simply a commentator. He has been identified as one of the key figures in the indirect back-channel talks between Tehran and Washington. Negotiations running through intermediaries, including Pakistan, Egypt, and Turkey. On the same day the F-15E went down, reporting indicated that mediators said Iran had rejected American demands and was refusing to attend a scheduled meeting with American diplomats in Islamabad. Within a single 24-hour window, Iran shot down a U.S. fighter, rejected a scheduled diplomatic meeting, and had its parliament speaker publicly mock the American search for a missing crew member. That is not the behavior of a government that believes it is losing and needs to accept terms. That is the behavior of a government that believes the current military and diplomatic balance gives it room to hold out. Trump's public framing of this war had rested on a specific and deliberate narrative. Iran is broken, its military is finished, a deal is imminent, American forces are unstoppable. That narrative served a purpose beyond describing battlefield conditions. It was designed to generate diplomatic pressure, to make Tehran believe that accepting American terms was its only remaining option. The F-15E shootdown did not simply produce a military loss, it punctured the specific pressure that narrative was designed to generate. When asked directly whether the downing would affect negotiations with Iran, Trump's answer was 3 words: no, it's war. When pressed on what would happen if the missing crew member was captured or harmed, the answer was, we hope that's not going to happen. For an administration whose entire wartime posture had been built on projecting certainty and strength, that response was a visible departure from the tone of 48 hours earlier. The White House called a press lid. Trump would not appear before reporters for the remainder of that Friday. His national security team gathered at the White House as the search continued. No formal CENTCOM statement, no Pentagon press conference. The administration managed the information flow carefully, citing the sensitivity of the active rescue operation. While Washington went quiet, Tehran did the opposite, broadcasting wreckage photos on state television, mobilizing civilians to search for the missing airmen, and posting statements across every available platform for a global audience. The missing crew member constrains Washington's options directly. Striking power plants while a service member's status inside Iran remains unknown carries a political cost that no administration absorbs without consequences. Every military action ordered during the active search risks complicating or foreclosing the rescue operation, running in parallel on Iranian territory. And Trump had simultaneously renewed his ultimatum, posting that all hell would rain down within 48 hours if the Strait of Hormuz was not reopened. That was his third deadline on the same issue. Iran's parliament speaker responded to the renewed ultimatum with 3 words: "Bring it on." The intelligence failure that April 3rd represents deserves sustained analytical attention because it is the dimension that most directly shapes what happens next in this conflict. American strike planning for Operation Epic Fury was built on an assessment of Iranian air defense capability that April 3rd demonstrated was wrong in ways that matter at the operational level. The assessment underestimated either the technical performance of Iranian systems, the integration sophistication of the Iranian air defense network as a layered whole, the training and readiness of Iranian operators at the individual unit level, or some compounding combination of all 3 simultaneously. Identifying which dimension of the assessment carried the most significant error is the analytical work. American intelligence agencies are engaged in right now under operational pressure because the answer determines what adjustments to mission, planning, approach profiles, electronic warfare support, and strike package composition are required to reduce the probability of additional losses going forward. The structural problem with conducting that analytical work on an accelerated timeline is that the data most useful for the analysis is not available. The F-15E's flight data recorder, if recovered, would provide precise information about the engagement sequence, what the crew detected, what countermeasures they deployed, at what point the missile achieved guidance lock, and how the terminal phase of the intercept unfolded. That recorder is currently at the bottom of Iranian territory or in Iranian custody, and neither location makes it available to American analysts. American intelligence agencies are therefore working from external sensor data, signals intelligence collected during the engagement window, and whatever information the surviving members of the strike package reported in the debrief that followed. That is a substantially thinner analytical data set than the engagement deserves, and the conclusions drawn from it carry a higher uncertainty margin than the operational decisions being built on those conclusions should ideally accept. Iranian military planners always understood that American strikes would target fixed radar and missile installations in the opening phase of any conflict. That assumption was embedded in Iranian air defense doctrine decades ago. The fixed outer layer sites were always designed as the expendable component, built to absorb the initial campaign, while the deeper mobile architecture remained concealed and intact. The interior layer was designed specifically to survive, dispersed and mobile, staffed by fighters who have prepared for years for exactly this phase of exactly this scenario. The design philosophy is built to outlast any air campaign that prioritizes fixed infrastructure targets, because you cannot preempt what you have not located, and you cannot strike what has already moved by the time your targeting data clears the approval chain. The regional political consequences of April 3rd are already visible in the diplomatic recalibrations happening across the Gulf. Every government currently hosting American military installations is quietly updating its strategic calculation based on demonstrated Iranian capability rather than assessed Iranian capability. Assessed capability is what intelligence agencies project from available technical information. Demonstrated capability is what Iranian air defense systems actually did on April 3rd. Assessed capability can be contextualized and managed through careful diplomatic communication. Demonstrated capability is a fact that every government in the region has now incorporated into its own strategic planning, independent of anything Washington communicates. Gulf state governments that have been publicly supportive of the American campaign while privately calculating their risk exposure are now recalibrating that calculation with a new data point that did not exist on April 2nd. Iran's ultimatum demanding termination of American basing access under threat of strikes against Gulf oil export infrastructure now carries substantially more credible weight than it did before 2 aircraft were destroyed in a single operational day. As the 6th week of Operation Epic Fury begins, the operational state of this conflict is characterized by a tension that neither side's official statements fully describe. The United States has imposed real, documented, and significant damage on Iran's fixed military infrastructure over 5 weeks of intensive air operations. Iran has retained enough distributed capability to destroy American aircraft, reject diplomatic meetings on the same day as military engagements, and sustain a coherent narrative of resistance for both its domestic population and the broader regional audience watching the conflict unfold. Both of those things are simultaneously true, and the tension between them, not the strike tallies or the official confidence assessments from either capital, is what will define the trajectory of this war through its next phase. The missing crew member is still inside Iran. The deadline that was set for April 6th is active. The Strait of Hormuz remains closed, and the distance between what was said on April 1st and what happened on April 3rd has not been explained to the American public with the clarity that the gap deserves. At the Global Brief, that gap between official narrative and operational reality is precisely what this analysis exists to examine. The next 48 hours will not resolve the war, but they will tell you something important about whether the coercive logic driving this conflict is producing any durable change in either side's strategic calculus, or whether both governments are simply applying pressure. The other will not absorb until something changes that no statement from either capital has yet acknowledged.